Hey everyone, this is Jen from KsKreations. Tonight we are here to talk about the Phoebe Bow. This here is the Phoebe Bow. It is a double-layered pinch bow with an 8-point tail. It has become a very popular bow the last few months, and I know there are some difficulties with getting the pinch correct for this bow, so that's what we're going to chat about tonight. First off, I will say for some tips and tricks, one of which to create an easier pinch is not using too many stiff materials. For instance, with this particular bow, you can see here that my top layer is a pretty thin, flimsy sheet, and then I have the chunky glitter, which is the harder material, which makes it that the pinch worked out pretty well for this one. And then as you see on this one, I have a thicker material on the top and the thinner on the bottom, so the pinch is a little bit blockier, I guess you could say, where it's more of a stiff bend instead of just a curve. If you try to use too stiff materials, the pinch can be very hard to create when making the bow, and that's what I've noticed seems to be the issue that most people are having, is that the combination of materials just doesn't work well for the Phoebe Bow. The other thing is holding the pinch. I know in the directions that come with the electronic file, I basically show that I'm holding it with just my fingers, which is possible for me, but I know it's not possible for everyone. So, I mean, there's multiple options with a pinch bow. With this particular style pinch, since it's 2 layers, the gluing method will not work. But you can always use a zip tie, which is my favorite go-to. Or some people use the tiny rubber band to hold the center. Or some even use embroidery floss. But like I said, my favorite go-to is the zip tie, and that is what we will be using tonight. I also usually keep handy a small clip that has an opening in the center, because once I get my pinch, I tend to just sort of clamp it with the clip and slide the zip tie through it. You'll see as I put it together. But here we go. Basically, the first thing you will need to do is gather your 2 pieces for the loops, and the skinnier one will lay directly on top of the wider one, as you can see here. And then we are just going to take both layers and fold them in half. So as you can see, I just folded it right over, right in half. And now you're going to go ahead and on this upper layer, you're going to grab the thin and the wide, and you're going to bend them back to the point where the wide, if you can see this here, the little V right here in the wide one meets the fold in the back. And then we're just simply going to flip it over and do the same. And like I said, this is where it can be tricky, just because if you have the stiffer material on the top, sometimes because of how little material folds over, it will fight with you to fold backwards. But then from here, I just sort of just take my little clip and hold it. So this is what we have at this point. And as you can see, I just slide my zip tie through and secure it. Now I will say, some people don't like using the zip ties just because of the big nub here. I tend to put it on where basically what would be the bottom of the bow, just so that the center strip then hides it. So there, I went ahead and tightened it some. I didn't lock it, like I didn't completely tighten it down, but I'm just going to go ahead and remove the clip and sort of fold them out and see what we have here. here is where we sit at this point, and we are going to just proceed to flip it over, and we are going to fold the ends of the layers in and glue them in place. So we start with the wide layer and just take one end at a time. Fold it in, and I do overlap the wide layer. The skinny layer may or may not overlap depending on what materials you use, but I just sort of obviously make sure it hugs up to your underlayer. You don't want a big gap there. And again, just fold it in. Okay, so that is where we stand. We have our bow loops made. I'm semi-happy. I don't want to go any tighter with the zip tie at this point. Because since we're using the stiff material on the top, it's looking a little wonky, but we'll just go with it. So I'm going to go ahead and snip that one off. Alright, and now we are just going to glue the tail on. And just put a dollop of glue there. And you basically are going to roughly center it. And one of the things I see sometimes is that the spacing here on the tail isn't 100% even. So I mean, you just want to eyeball it and sort of scoot it into place so it looks nice and even for you. And then last but not least, we will be adding our center strip. I am using a clip just because that's what I prefer for this particular bow that I'm making. And go ahead and glue it in place. And I do put a little dab of glue there just to help hold that down. And as you saw when I brought the center strip, I sort of made sure I tucked that flat back so it wasn't pulling it forward. We're just going to glue it on the back. And I use scraps for my center strips, so they're usually a little off on the length, so. Bear with me, I'm just I put my fingers in and just sort of bend the loops a little, just to try to even out my crease there. But there you have it. There is a completed Phoebe bow. I hope this tutorial helps. Like I said, just keep in mind about using the materials that you use. Make sure if one of them is thick, the other should be thin. You can use two thin materials together, that's fine. It's just the thick materials are what make it a bit harder. And like I said, for the pinch in the center, zip ties I find are the easiest. But some people also use the tiny rubber bands or embroidery thread or floss. Any questions, just let us know. Thanks and happy crafting!